Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you, and when I say you, I mean everyone in this auditorium and everyone in the other auditorium who is seeing us through simulcast. So welcome to all of you. It's so energizing to see such a great crowd turn out for this exhibition. So tonight is the opening celebration of our special exhibition, Inventur, Art in Germany, 1943 to 1955. We're honored, very honored tonight to be joined by Konrad Klapheck, a featured artist in the exhibition, as well as students, faculty, colleagues, friends, and lenders to the exhibition, many of whom traveled very far to be here. As the home of the busch-reisinger Museum, the Harvard Art Museums has a special connection to the art of Germany. Founded 115 years ago as the Germanic Museum, the busch-reisinger has as its focus the art of Northern and Central Europe. Since its inception, it is a leading center in the United States on the art of German-speaking countries in particular, furthering scholarly developments in the field and allowing broader access to and understanding of the collections in its care. And you'll see a great example of that tonight, where our permanent collection comes together with loans from all over the world to make a really compelling story, a new story. Inventur carries on this tradition. While the narrative of the post-war German art typically begins in the 1960s, with artists now well known internationally such as Gerhard Richter, Sigmar Polke, and George Baselitz. The immediate post-war period in Germany has been, until this point, largely unexplored. Inspired by our own collections and our teaching and research mission here at Harvard, the exhibition on view in our third-floor galleries and the essays published in the exhibition catalog uncover a period in history of art making that was remarkably generative, complex, and deserving of closer attention. On an occasion like this, we have much gratitude. We are very grateful to the lenders and supporters who made this exhibition a possibility. Support for the lecture tonight is provided by the Leventritt Fund, which was established through the generosity of his wife, children, and friends of the late M. Victor Leventritt, Harvard class of 1935. The purpose of this fund is to present outstanding speakers and scholars on the history and theory of art to the Harvard and Greater Boston communities. The Harvard Art Museums are also deeply grateful to the German Friends of the busch-reisinger Museum for making the exhibition catalog possible and for providing additional funding for the exhibition. Some of them are here with us tonight, and we want to offer a special welcome to Cambridge and a special thanks to you. Major support for the exhibition and related programming comes from the Daimler curatorship of the busch-reisinger Museum, as I mentioned, also the Victor Leventritt Fund, and the Richard L. Menschel Endowment Fund. In addition, modern and contemporary art programs at the Harvard Art Museums are made possible in part by the generous support from the Emily Rao Pulitzer and Joseph Pulitzer Jr. Fund for Modern and Contemporary Arts. That's a big mouthful, but it's my job to say these thanks, and we're very grateful to everybody who has been involved in this major undertaking. The Inventur project, both the exhibition and its substantial catalog, has been beautifully realized through the contributions of our dedicated and talented staff at the Harvard Art Museums. And I'm continually impressed by my colleagues, and I'm grateful for their hard work and expertise as we celebrate them tonight, along with the artists who are represented in the exhibition. In particular, I want to recognize the curator of the exhibition, Lynette Roth, Daimler curator of the busch-reisinger Museum and head of the Division of Modern and Contemporary Art here at Harvard Art Museums. Lynette began the project more than 5 years ago, visiting collections throughout Germany and researching the nearly 50 artists that populate the exhibition. She's been tireless in building our permanent collection so that these artists will remain well represented in our collection going forward. You'll see many of these new acquisitions in the exhibition tonight. So many of the artists you'll see in the exhibition tonight are virtually unknown outside of Germany, and it is a huge honor to present them to you here tonight and to celebrate them with you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, my esteemed colleague, Lynette Roth.
Thank you so much, Martha, and good evening, everyone. One of the phrases that has been used to describe the art of the immediate post-war period in Germany, in reference to its myriad production in dispersed pockets across the country, is productive disorder. And for helping me take disorder and turn it into the exhibition you will see upstairs, at the Harvard Art Museums, I am especially grateful to the Division of Modern and Contemporary Art and the curatorial assistant for Inventur, Dakota DeVos. Conservators and conservation fellows from the Strauss Center for Conservation and Technical Studies also contributed their valuable expertise at every stage. In collections management, I owe a huge debt of thanks to Registrar Francine Flynn, designer Justin Lee, and our incredible installation crew under the supervision of Karen Gausch. Zach Jensen and his team designed our beautiful catalog, and Mike Abias and Sarah Kushner edited away any, and I mean any, disorder in its content. That impressive content, the result of close looking and extensive research, would not have been possible without the key contributions of a number of talented graduate students and emerging scholars, many of whom are here tonight, so thank you all. And finally, my deepest thanks goes to Ilka Furman, the former Ranke B. and Pamela M. Tia Curatorial Fellow in the Busch-Reisinger Museum, and now a curator at the Sheeran in Frankfurt, who was my partner in all aspects of this endeavor during her 3-year tenure at the museums. Thank you so much, Ilka. Inventur, Art in Germany, 1943 to 55, is the first exhibition to address modern German art in the period immediately following the Second World War, a period in that country best known as one of collective amnesia around the events of the war and the Holocaust. Not surprisingly then, as far as art is concerned, the period too was long thought of as a gap, a period lacking in serious artistic output. In Allied footage from Berlin in 1945, we catch at a distance a flash of red, and as the camera zooms in, we see a woman airing out her bedsheets, going about her daily tasks as if the building in which she lives would in fact shield her from the outside world and the camera's gaze. Such an apparent obliviousness to one's surroundings and the omnipresent ruin was at the heart of the characterization by émigré and political thinker Hannah Arendt of her fellow Germans' initial response to the war and the Holocaust. She experienced their behavior as one of shocking indifference. Amid the ruins, she wrote in 1950, Germans mail each other picture postcards of cathedrals and marketplaces, public buildings and bridges that no longer exist. In this sense, going about one's daily business, busyness for busyness' sake, is a sign of the collective amnesia of the immediate post-war period. In her 1958 book, The Human Condition, however, Arendt emphasizes the private sphere, one that was absent not just under Nazi strictures, but literally and metaphorically in Germany in the immediate aftermath of the war. For her, the private sphere is necessary for nurturing the singularity of the self, an undertaking crucial to the possibility of political and public action. This we see in Inventur as first a turning inwards to allow for the possibility of a turning outwards. The title of the exhibition, Inventur, inventory or stock-taking in English, derives from a poem by Günter Eich, written in an American POW camp in 1945. In it, the first-person protagonist lists his meager belongings, inert objects of everyday life, his cap, his tumbler, but also his pencil that allows him to write. Not simply a matter-of-fact list of what remains, Eich's poem contains several key moments that reveal undesirable yet deeply human traits like envy or secrecy. The poem is thus marked by an unwillingness or inability to fully bare oneself to the outside world. What was a destabilization of the private and public sphere was also, in the immediate post-war period, a destabilization of the self. Like Eich's poem, the artworks in Inventur speak to such deeply human questions. Consider, for example, this drawing by Kurt Kverner, one of hundreds of such works depicting the things the artist sat on, slept on, and ate from in a POW camp. The remnants of the personhood of an artist whose personal and political convictions were challenged and eventually muted by the Nazi regime. Of course, any activity around the arts in Germany in the immediate post-war period is absent of those who were racially or politically persecuted by the Nazi regime and died at its hands, as well as those artists who emigrated to avoid such persecution. Many artists, not under threat of their lives, but rather their livelihood, also emigrated from the country as it became increasingly difficult to work under the Nazi regime, a fate sealed by 1937 and the infamous Degenerate Art exhibition. It is, in fact, the exile experience. We need only think of our own Max Beckmann or Bauhaus émigrés. It's the exile experience that we are most familiar with, and that has long dominated the discussion around the period. Most of the German artists who were declared degenerate by the Nazi regime did, however, stay in Germany. Many more artists, not yet well known or established enough to even attract the attention of the regime, did the same. After the war, these are the artists who reconnected with pre-war and wartime practices, with each other, and with a public indoctrinated by 12 years of Nazi rule. The term typically used for modern artists who stayed in Nazi Germany is inter-immigration, a term used by artists themselves also at the time. As Inventur shows, inter-immigration has as many meanings as the artists to whom it has been applied. Unable to acquire materials and exhibit publicly, many modern artists found work instead in the industrial or commercial sphere, which in turn impacted any art making they still did. Jeanne Mammen, best known for her watercolors of Berlin nightlife of the 1920s, for example, registered as a graphic designer. Her work from the war was thus painted in tempera on cardboard intended for air raid protection. And we see her at work in her cramped live-in studio. After war's end, Mammen continued to salvage materials. Everything must be used, she wrote at the time. Here, wire from a Soviet bivouac near her home defines two shaky, overlapping profiles. The frequent repurposing of salvaged goods was not solely the result of material scarcity. It also allowed for a material layering of past and present, as in Gerhard Altenburg's 1950 Ecce Homo, which repurposes paper covered with the artist's childhood drawings of military maneuvers. Drawn on top is a harrowed self-portrait of the artist who, drafted at age 18, had killed a Russian soldier in close combat, an act he was never able to forgive himself for. Often, 1945, the year of war's end, is considered the beginning of post-war art. By beginning the exhibition 2 years earlier, in the year 1943, the year of increased Allied bombings that brought total war home for the Germans, Inventur questions that long-standing assumption, insisting instead on a continuity of artistic practice, albeit one drastically altered by the Nazi period and the realities of war. Hermann Gluckner's spatial refraction of a rectangle, for example, remakes a key 1935 sculpture by the artist destroyed in the Allied bombing of Dresden in 1945, thus bridging the artist's pre-war, wartime, and post-war practice. Economic recovery began in the late 1940s, and especially in the West, there was a growing interest in creating commercial products and industrial prototypes for the homes of a public still wary of modern art. In other words, in the 1950s, there was an ongoing, albeit very different, interest in the private sphere. While there is no discrete end to the themes addressed in the exhibition, the year 1955 has been associated with West Germany's so-called economic miracle, which led the country to become one of the most prosperous in Europe. It was also the year of the first Documenta in Kassel, which included Willy Baumeister's large Monteru seen here. The Documenta exhibition put German art on the international stage and has largely defined our thinking about the post-war period ever since. 1955 was also the year that a 20-year-old student at the Düsseldorf Art Academy named Konrad Klapheck painted his first typewriter, later referring to it as the discovery of himself. Klapheck, now 82, has since painted countless typewriters, sewing machines, showers, telephones, irons, bicycle bells, and so on, a thematic dedication that has earned him the title of the machine painter. Klapheck, who began to teach at the Düsseldorf Art Academy in 1979, is today one of Germany's most renowned painters. It is thus now my great, great honor and sincere pleasure to introduce Konrad Klapheck, who will present his lecture entitled War and Peace in German Art After World War II. Please join me in welcoming Konrad Klapheck.
Dear directors and rectors, curators, helpers, members of staff of the Busch-Reisinger Museum of the Harvard Art Collections, I thank you very much for the kind and somewhat flattering words by Lisette Roth, which make me a little bit timid. If you hire an artist to do a speech on art in general, chances are right that in the end he will talk exclusively about himself alone. And I can't be an exception, but maybe there are a few plus points in this situation because I was a young aspiring artist in 1945. I was 10 years old, and I had a very special angle regarding art. I was a young man, the artist as a young man, but I lived it. I went through this period, the 50s, partly despised today, partly sought after by collectors, furniture, all sorts of art decorative, from ashtrays to big vases. It's partly very popular, partly, as it was the case with Art Nouveau, Jugendstil, Liberty style, it was out of fashion. And now it comes back into fashion. That's interesting, I think. What I can give you, what is it? It is this honest look on what was happening, the astounding changement of styles, of trends and fashions, of always new ideas, always a change of being old-fashioned and being trendy. So my companion Wanda, who gives you her regards, she couldn't make it for reasons of health, and she judged my text too long and too personal and too narcissistic, rightfully so, but so we are artists. But I can assure you what I have to say, what I can give you is honest and authentic. So please, the first reproductions. They go pairwise. I have baptized this lecture Peace and War after World War II. And it's clear here is mostly war, the subject. I was born in 1935 when the Nazis had taken full power of every part of the day of the German people. And there were a few gifted artists who sold their souls to the devil and were blinded by the idea of fame and fortune, as for instance Arno Breker, who conceived these sorts of athletic, bodybuilder-like nudes, male nudes, to decorate the long corridors of the official buildings of the Third Reich. And I'm glad that there were artists alive who refused being bought, as the noble lady sculptor Käthe Kollwitz, depicting a father kneeling, mourning at the grave of his son fallen in combat. Next picture, please. There were artists who did not sell their soul, would never have done so, and had the great luck being able to emigrate. As for instance, Oelze, but he in the end failed to make it to America, where he had a gallerist in New York. He did this painting after a photograph of Lindbergh's landing after having crossed the Atlantic, landing somewhere near Paris. And there was a press clipping, a photograph in the newspaper with a large crowd, the men, some of the women too, wearing hats, following the fashion of the day. Both the photo and the painting of Richard Oelze were commented as being premonitions of the air raids and the bombing terror of the later war years. At the right side, there's a painting of Max Ernst called The House Angel, and it was interpreted as depicting a dictator, a political dictator, being totally under the alcohol of his own power, drunk with his own power. A little bit a parallel to the theater piece Ubu Roi, The King Ubu, by Yari, the famous Dada poet. Next, please. And when, after several years at Eastern Germany, where my mother and me have found refuge during the last war years, when I returned with my mother to Düsseldorf in late 1945, I found this as art. The abstraction was beginning to become the leading movement, the leading style in modern art. And in two variations, a constructive sort of abstraction with Piet Mondrian as being the pioneer, and lyrical expressionism, lyrical abstraction, informel, Taschism, from the word Tasch for blot, a free form of abstract expressionism with its main center being in New York in the gallery landscape of Manhattan. I was very excited about both forms of abstraction, but in a way I understood that this was so wonderfully put to a final stage by Mondrian, really works for eternity. It would not be wise to start a rivalry with such great forerunners. And Pollock fascinated me too, but I knew it was not my world. Next to pictures, what was my world? I had lived, being the son of two art historians, I have lived in the shadow of a fabulous library with mostly books on art, and at the age of 6 or 3 I was well familiar with the art of German Renaissance, and the names of Dürer, Holbein, Cranach, Grünewald were familiar to me, and this was what excited me even more so than abstraction. I knew maybe it was necessary. There was some great art produced within the borders of peinture abstract painting. But what I really loved were these masters of the Renaissance, especially Holbein. And this is one of the paintings, one of the marvels of the Berlin Gemäldegallery. It's worth a travel to Berlin alone, this piece of painting. And I got some encouragement from paintings of the 20s, when artists had counteracted to expressionism and to abstract art, which was not yet on the stage. And this is, of course, a painting by Otto Dix, To the Beauty, being the title. And I was fascinated by the small color reproduction in a book, in a big encyclopedia in the library of my parents. And I said to myself, maybe there might be more possible in this direction. Next, please. And there were artists who continued to paint in a figurative way, even after World War II. And one of them was Bruno Goller, at the left of the double reproduction. They are always coming in twosomes. The Coffee Mill by Bruno Goller, which impressed me quite a bit. And I realized it is possible to make one isolated object the subject of a painting. And in 1954, I entered the academy. I had to finish first a year of studies, only drawing, with changing models, male and female. And then after a year, I entered the painting class. I have to conclude the chapter about politics and my parents. My parents used to hate the Nazis, and it was a difficult situation for my father. Part of his colleagues at the Art Academy in Düsseldorf, where he was teaching as a professor, he was teaching art history, and part of his colleagues already flirted with Nazism, and he might enter the academy in the morning, and one of the brownish colleagues, brownish meaning Nazi influenced, since the Nazis, the hooligans, the troops of hooligans, they wear skirts of brownish ochre color. And one of his brownish colleagues might say Heil Hitler to him, which was prescribed. Instead of hello or good morning, it was prescribed to say Heil Hitler. And my father used to answer with a pun. He said Heil du ihn, making advantage out of the double meaning of Heil. Heil, vivat, means long live the king, long live the queen. Vivat the king, vivat the queen. But the other meaning was to cure in a medical sense. So he answered by saying, you should heal this crazy man. And this didn't guarantee him zero popularity among the officials. So one beautiful morning in springtime 1934, he got a letter in which he was dismissed without notice, and as reason was given for lack of national spirit. My father was furious. He said, I am a patriot, but I'm a patriot of the Rhineland. And that was true. He put the domes and the castles of the Rhineland on the map of art history again. And in a way, it was the mercy of God, mercy of heaven, that he died in 1939. It might have ended very badly with his ideas and disagreement with the Nazi spirit. So our teacher, it was the same Bruno Goller of the painting at the left, who was head of the studio of the class. He welcomed us, the newly arrived, and said, for the first time now at the painting class, I'd like you to do something very simple, not great historical stuff, maybe a still life. And he showed us the bottles and the pans, the cups and bowls, and some rotten fruits in a basket. And I was disappointed. I had different things in mind. A couple of days before, I had been for the first time in my life to the Dutch city of The Hague, and I had seen the fantastic Rembrandt painting, King David playing the harp for King David. David playing the harp for King David. And in those days, I had spent a few days in Paris. It was a gift of my mother as a recompensation for a successful examination of baccalaureate, Abitur in German. And during these 5 days in Paris, I went for a visit to a friend of my mother's, a professional translator, and he had on his typewriter, on his writing desk, an old typewriter with light and shadows and all kinds of metallic lights. And I told myself, I'd like to paint this, make this the subject of a painting. And this in the style of a painting of Dali, which I had seen the morning, the first time in my life that I had seen a painting, an original painting by Dali. And this in the style, the way Dali painted the keys of a piano. The painting was 6 apparitions of Lenin on a typewriter. And the virtuosity, the precision and brilliance of the painting had very much impressed me. So I did this. I showed up with an old typewriter I had loaned from a shop, 6 marks a week. And Goller told me, yes, but please simplify as much as you can. Of course, I did the contrary, as many elements as possible, as many tabs as possible, as many keys as possible, and everything with the illusion of form and of volume. And when I was ready, there was quite sort of interest in the academy. Other students came, and I remember a couple of young lovers, and she asked him, "What do you think about that?" And the boy said he should add a lemon, then it would be at least a still life. So it was not evident that this was exactly what I did not want, a still life. But Goller told me it's not exactly what I had expected, but it's very personal. Maybe there is more in the subject. If you want to go on, you know that I'm a specialist for figurative painting, for objects of all kinds. I can be useful for you. I would be for you every minute you need me with positive criticism, and I'll give you already today my sympathy. This was good advice, and later, in imitation of the abstracts of New York, especially Jackson Pollock, I did my part of dripping and putting blots on paper, and Goller watched these attempts and told me, "You are quite skillful doing this, but don't forget there are at least 17,700 young painters painting in this style. Do you want to be the number 17,702? And the night I destroyed all my abstract work, which no longer exists. So the next, please. Friends of mine, a little bit older than I was, went for more modern instruction, and there were two stars in the teaching field. The one being the veteran of German abstract painting, very international, speaking decent French, having been often to Paris, having been in contact with Léger, Miro, and others. Willy Baumeister, there is a painting, a beautiful painting of Baumeister here in the collection of this house. This was Willy Baumeister. He had not been painting during the war. He suffered from the expressed verdict of active painting, and could paint only clandestinely. And at the right side, a watercolor by Ernst Wilhelm Ney, the star of official art in those years, a gifted, a good painter in my modest view. And he had a class for painting in Hamburg, was very much respected. A former student of his was at the academy. He told me, I learned a lot from him. He told me never put a light blue at the bottom of a painting. It's the sky associated with the idea of heaven. Quite useful advice. Next, please. So I returned reluctantly with bad conscience, with the idea of repetition and lack of new ideas. I returned to the theme to the subject of typewriter, and you can see there is a certain changement undergoing. The subject is getting more stylized, simplified, and less colors. Till today, I have painted 43 versions of a typewriter. And I must say I had fun with all of them. And I always told my students, That's very important, that you get fun out of your artistic activity. If there is no fun, there is no worth. If you want to give fun, you have experience fun yourself. There should always be a part of pleasure in it. Next. Yes. Then I was living in Paris alone. I had foolishly separated myself from a good and loving girl with whom I wanted to stay for a couple of years in Paris. And I was living alone. I had inherited the studio of a fellow artist, and he from time to time visited me. He was about 10 years my senior and had already a gallery in Paris, La Galerie Cordier. And in the cold corridor outside my little studio, there was an old Singer sewing machine, and my friend told me, Konrad, despite the respect concerning your abstract paintings, but this would be the right subject for you. Give it a try. Do a painter with a sewing machine, which I did. And when it was nearly completed, there was a name for the painting. In my head, there was always ringing one word, and the word was the offended bride. Die beleidigte Braut in German. La fiancée mortifiée in French. And I felt I had to give in. I accepted this as a title. It was the nice girl I had left a couple of weeks before. So I made this a custom. I baptized all of my paintings, and sometimes I showed my paintings to my friends, the machines with the human titles, and the result was always roars of laughter, but no one took it seriously. But there were a few artists, fellow artists, already adult men, the painter Karl Otto Goetz, another member of the selected few of this beautiful exhibition of Lynette Roth, and Karl Otto Goetz, who was in contact with the circle of André Breton. He told me, Klapheck, never let a painting of yours outside the studio without the title. Write them on top of the title, on the recto side. Write die beleidigte Braut, the offended bride. Write it in letters, maybe in light and shadow, the way Picasso had signed several of his paintings in the 20s. So I accepted this advice. It was good advice. The left is the wounded bride, the offended bride, and the right is the right one is offended, not the offended. It's the intellectual woman. I've thought of my mother, who was both a woman, attractive woman, but an art historian and an intellectual worker as well. And this was the years of renewed interest in Art Nouveau, which my wife later started to collect. The glass vases of quite a group of artists in France, Nancy. Gallet, the name of the artist. The next, please. Yes, and this is underneath the paintings, at the left side, a drawing. And this is the main part of the activity, the compositional preparation of a painting, of a composition. And maybe you have seen, you remember the Mondrian, which I have shown together with Jackson Pollock. I always started look at the horizontal lines, especially at the bottom, and they come in parallels, and I measure and measure, and there is a central cross, and on this central cross there are cross points of the contour, the lines which describe the contour of the object, but there are the prolonged construction lines, and they have their cross points too, and there are all kinds of interdigs which no line, no contour should cross the cross point of the red cross. So in the end it becomes more mathematics than art, but it's my style of getting to a result. And I'm quite a little bit reluctant to show it to you. I have made the experience that many people are not interested in form. It's the same as with music. When there is a concert and then maybe a meeting of visitors before, and someone is giving explanations about the structure of a sonata, the first theme, the second theme in a different musical modus, and the meeting of the two, and there are always some people who protest or starting to yawn, saying, if I listen to music, I dream, I feel like flying on clouds. Form doesn't interest me. But the form is the message. It's very important. I wish it were that easy. And you see, the executed painting looks quite different as the drawing, but I keep the drawing as well. It was my colleague Gotthard Graupner who put me on the right, I think so, on the right way, saying, in a way, I prefer your drawings to your finished paintings. Your drawings, there is still the possibility of different solutions instead of the cold precision of the final product. And when he saw that, I was a little bit offended. He told me, then do the drawing on a different piece of paper or different piece of canvas. Then you have both drawing and painting, and you can sell both. Which I did. The selling point included. So next, please. Yes, sometimes I'm asked, what is the style called you are painting in? I'm getting sometimes visits from school classes. One especially interesting visit was the visit of a school class of mentally retarded children. And they asked me the most intelligent and most precise and witty questions, unforgettable. And when they asked, how is this style called? And I answered, the Klapheck style. Everybody is laughing and the situation is smooth again. Next question usually is, how much costs a painting? And it was a moment when the great soccer star, the German football player, Beckenbauer, went to New York to play within the team of can't remember the name, but there was. Thank you very much. So I said, listen, do you know what Beckenbauer said when asked to play alongside the New York team, Cosmos New York? No, he said, über Geld spricht man nicht. And then it's silence. And here in this case, one might ask, is it surrealist? Is it surrealistic? I would say yes, not always, but in this case, yes. There is a lot of chance in the painting. And there is a notion of surrealism, objective chance. Der sinnvolle Zufall. Zufall mit tieferer Bedeutung. Objective chance. And on the table at the left side to my Chevalier. There is a little table, and there was in total disorder, reproductions, press clippings. There was a glass passage in Paris, Passage de Cairo, and at the above, an illustration of an old telephone as one is used in the old films of the 20s, in the films of Fritz Lang and so on. And this in one painting. I told myself, if it is by chance in the neighborhood on my table, why not recreate the neighborhood of two articles which have no common factor. And this is the result. Here we have another telephone. Now I need the pointer. Yes, chance was the key word. And I like chance. I like the laws, the verdicts of my compositional prescriptions and verdicts. And here is a percentage of chance as well. I very much loved and still love the work of a French painter born at the seaside of the pebble stones of the French Atlantic coast, and drew inspiration from these stone agglomerations for a lifetime. And I painted first the background, the blue background with the illusion of a tunnel. Yes. And I remembered that this painter, which I liked from the Bretagne, Yves Tinguely, not to be confounded with Tinguely, the Swiss artist of kinetic sculptures, he always painted the background first and then asked himself, how can we go further? How can we continue? And put something on top of the background. And I had painted the blue background with a tunnel-like illusion. So I drew a receiver of a telephone, and now I was faced with the problem of connecting the exit of the tunnel. Maybe you do it better. Yes, and underneath, still a few centimeters below. There, exactly there. This point and the exit of the tunnel should be connected. I was dreaming of an instrument to fight against distance, to overcome with a connection. And in the end, I quite, in a dreamlike sort of feeling, I first drew and then painted this cable and gave it a very female, very voluptuous, round sort of forms. And now a friend of mine, amateur psychoanalyst, told me, oh, I see, the umbilical cord of the mother is threatening to suffocate the newly born baby. And the funny thing is, it exactly had happened. To my son, who now is 30 centimeters taller than I am, very much alive, has wife and children, and came out alive of this situation. And at the left side, there is a painting the reproduction of a painting by Marcel Duchamp. And there are intellectual, especially French journalists, who always turn up with the name of Marcel Duchamp. Sometimes I'm thinking they want to show that they are familiar with the name. And is it in the tradition of the glass painting by Duchamp in Philadelphia? I usually say yes, well, maybe. And at the first time when I was confronted with this reproduction, I was a little bit disappointed. I had the foolish idea of having been the first to make use of the machine as a subject in art. Of course, I was not the first, but I had the choice to be annoyed that I was not the first, or to be proud having a painter of such qualities as a pre-runner, as a pioneer. And in art, usually one is standing on the shoulders of another one. It's not so much you understand, it's what you take from it, what you learn from it. There's a famous temple in the painting of Perugino, which Raphael turned into the background of his wonderful painting at the Brera in Milano, the fiançailles de la Holy Virgin. So they all have stolen. So next, please. Yes, this is my list of subjects. There are 12 all in all, and I constated that there are relationships. There are different worlds. There is the spiritual world of the male gender, the instrument of politicians, of writers, of economies, of all kinds of organization, the typewriter. And the next subject in my list of paintings was the sewing machine, and the ribbon becomes another sort of ribbon, the thread of the machine, of the sewing machine, and this is a physical part of activity. Clothes and to hide nakedness is female, but the bureau and politics stuff is more the world of men. And then here is the water tap, and there is a very strange similarity between the douche and the telephone receiver. In the catalog, it's named telephone douche. And all sorts of perforations, the flat iron, and so on. And at the end, there is the bicycle bell, which retakes the circular form of the tap, of the key, of the typewriter. Yes, it's good. Yes, I was taking inspiration from colleagues already on the art market, and it was the time of the Zero movement. And this was Mavinier, the Brazilian artist living and working in Ulm. And I told myself I should try the serial formula, the raster as well, but in my way, with light and shadow and with the illusion of volume and with colors. So this is the bicycle bell. Bling, 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 bling. And as a child of 3 years, I was already amazed when taking off the top of the bell, it didn't sound any longer because the elements which should touch to make noise were too distant. And this fascinated me, and years later I made a painting of it, and I made use of repetition. It's more or less the same model 20 times, and there are relations. There is not much of a composition. The composition is in the color. There are the red elements, red and orange, which form an Y, and then totally different, there are the bluish forms in a counter movement. And then there are neutral forms in ochre and yellow. So the tension is achieved via the color. And I called it alphabet of passion. And the same amateur analyst told me, oh yes, very clear, it's a catalog of love positions. And again, I answered, maybe. I never contradict to opinions of this sort of idea, and I think it's a positive thing when people follow their own illusions, associations. I'm doing it my way at the same time. Next, please. Yes, this was at the end of the Bicycle Bells series. There were about 20 pieces, and here they are isolated. They are like in the shelves of a closet. Next, please. And here we have the influence of trompe-l'œil, which means to cheat the eyes, to put shadows, lights and shadows so convincingly at the right places that you feel inclined to touch the painting because you are believing that the revolver actually is hanging there. In my painting at the right side, the red painting, it's not a revolver, it's the fire hose, a fire extinguisher called fire hose as well. I made a drawing on the restroom in the Museum of Catalonian Art in Barcelona, and took it as a great gift with me, a sketch of it, and later at home I turned it into a painting. There is a strange story within the painting. I called it lamento, meaning music of lamentation, music of sadness. So it was for me music, funeral music. And sorry that I'm getting sentimental, but it's part of our life. A few days after the painting was terminated, my wife died in a fire. There was no fire extinguisher at hand. I'm not believing that I'm a prophet, but strange it was. I had told my wife about the painting. She said, yes, I'm curious. Next week you should show me. It never happened. And this is now nearly 40 years ago. So the next, quite a well-known and popular painting of mine, 5 drilling machines, not sewing machines, their greater brother, bigger brother, the drilling machine, and with influences of military hats. And I call it war. It was a war I had seen at the age of 10, at the age of 9, in Leipzig when the city was in flames. And my parents not, but my uncles and cousins were all lamenting about the loss of a beautiful house and 3 pianos in one, 3 Steinways in one house. But I said, yes, they are lamenting rightfully, but on the other hand, the red is very beautiful. Only later I understood that it was a sad evening. But naive as I was impressed by the beauty of the color. Next, please. Yes. Am I a political painter? Yes, I think sometimes yes, but not in the sense of atomic explosions in a painting with the atomic explosion at the horizon. This is too simple, would be too simple. I was in Israel shortly after the Second Gulf War under Bush father, and my relatives showed me their collection of gas masks, and I did photographs on the balcony, and Uri, my cousin, told me, you may select one. Next time, next war, we get new ones. And I selected the smallest one because there wasn't much room in my suitcase, and it revealed as being a child's gas mask. Well, no comment. A child's gas mask. What a gas mask. What a horror. Yes, it's one more double painting. I think I should. This is a painting here in the collection, a gift of the Lufthansa to the Harvard Museum's collections. Next, please. And this was a drawing, the painting of my girlfriend, Wanda. And here she made the shadow, the main subject, which I, in the painting at the right side, imitated. That the shadow leads its own life and becomes a quasi-illogical addition. Yes, and now the next and last picture. One can't speak about German art in the 20th century without mentioning the name of Gerhard Richter, the most successful living artist in Germany. The left side, a nude sending a staircase, a quotation of the famous painting of Marcel Duchamp of the same title. At the right side, he tried his hands at the German flag, red, black, red, golden. And one might say, well, this is a little bit too simple. But the great painter, American painter, Jasper Johns, had done just the same things with stripes and stars and made it the subject of a brilliant painting in beautiful colors. And now is the last painting. At the left side, another painting of Richter, and it's called Uncle Rudi. And I asked myself, why Uncle Rudi? Evidently it's a soldier, maybe on a couple of free days back from the front. And under the magnifying glass, I saw a strange signet on the head of the cap, and it was a skull. So the man was an SSer, member of the SS. I questioned Richter, and he shrugged his shoulders and said, yes, I can't change it. My uncle Rudi was member of the SS, but you know you can't select your father nor your uncle. The man is still alive. And in the same On the same line, I give you the painting of another painter, Felix Nussbaum, a Jewish painter, born in Osnabrück, and he lived hidden in Brussels in the shadow of his beloved Flemish artists, Bruegel and Van Eyck, but was denunciated, transported to Auschwitz and murdered. But the story has a happy end. The city, the officials of Osnabrück amassed a lot of money and hired Daniel Libeskind, the famed architect of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and they had him erect a Felix Nussbaum house, a museum of Felix, in honor of Felix Nussbaum. And the building is so beautiful that it became quite successful in the city. And nowadays, an architect told me, I see you are taking an interest in our architecture. It's very popular, and it's the most popular meeting point for young lovers. They like to meet there. I think this is a good sign. And with this diapositive, I want to finish my little lecture. Thank you for your interest.